groundbreaking evidence showing the power of nutrition, how we treat disease. But today, a new frontier is reshaping the future of healthcare: lifestyle medicine. Lifestyle medicine is more than prevention. It is about reversing disease, restoring vitality, and redefining.
Good evening, everyone. How are we all doing? Are we all excited for tonight? I can't wait. I've been really looking forward to this. I don't know about you guys. But this week has been quite a whirlwind of a journey, isn't it? We've covered a lot of ground. At the beginning of the week, we did what you guys can remember. Which topic did we cover on Monday night? The microbiome. You are what they eat was the most important organ you never knew about. So we started off. We have this understanding. Like tonight, we're going to be looking at the brain and the neurochemistry of the brain. But we also looked at there was actually a second brain, so to speak, that your gut actually is an independent neurological organ in its own right. And so we've closed the loop, so to speak, tonight. Although we do have one more session tomorrow night, so don't miss that as well. So it was quite a fascinating topic that we looked at the gut-brain axis and how there's a unique and intimate relationship between the gut and the brain through multiple avenues, through blood, lymphatic tissue, and nerves as well, and how taking care of the gut ecosystem in the large intestine leads to large consequences, including the brain. And the following night, we had a pit stop at a very fascinating study that really changed my life, the China study, a groundbreaking study that empowers us and gives us inspiration that actually cancer is not the end of the road. That we can prevent cancer, and not just that, we can even reverse cancer and prevent it from coming back again. And with the knowledge and that we obtained for that, we found out that actually a lot of the so-called carcinogens don't really have its potency unless it's combined with animal-based protein. And it's that animal-based protein studies that shows that when it's combined together, that's when it has its carcinogenic effect. That was really empowering, because we often thought that our genes were kind of beholden to our genes, we're beholden to our genetic makeup, and that we're doomed to succumb to whatever predilecting cancer that we may be previously exposed to. But actually, what we find out actually that's not the case, and that's actually very empowering. And then we looked at this silent killer called hypertension. It's one of those things that by the time when it's uncontrolled and you find out, by that time it's already too late, because it's already wreaked havoc. So that was a very, very sobering discussion. But it's I hope we've all bought our blood pressure cuffs, or you're thinking or planning about it soon, because that's one of the strategies that we were taught on how to get on top of our blood pressure, because we know the devastating effects on our end organs. And we're going to talk about blood pressure tonight, on the impact and the link between our blood pressure and developing dementia, how crucial the link is between those two. So buckle up. And we looked at how to improve our immune system reboot. We all need a reboot, isn't it, from time to time? Every now and then, not just spiritually, but also physically. And many of us, we're exposed to the elements each and every day. If you go out in public, who knows what kind of viruses are out there? Who knows if there's going to be a new coronavirus? But what we discuss is that when we apply those New Start principles that you can see here, these 8 laws of health, and when we went into, we can do a whole series on immunity, honestly, easily. But we got a bit of a, if you like, a taste or an introduction how we can apply those basic principles and give ourselves a robust immune system. And then tomorrow night, you don't want to miss this, because we're going to go into a real deep dive. We're going to go through under the microscope and look at the relationship between epigenetics and DNA, and how that relates to the author of our DNA, and also vice versa, that actually ancient manuscripts found in the Torah and the Word of God actually points us, actually tells us about this DNA. Did you know that? Do you know that the Bible talks about the DNA? Believe it or not, and we'll find out where we can find that text, and how crucial that is, and how that it speaks to the awesomeness of the author of this machinery, as we've learned this week. But tonight, we're going to be looking at how not to lose your mind. How many of us have been frustrated by losing our keys or anything like that? We've all been there, isn't it? You're thinking, oh man, what's going on? Is there something pathological? Or is this something that we can, It's just normal. Okay, so we're going to do a deep dive into it. So we're going to focus specifically on this umbrella condition called dementia, which encapsulates all the other conditions like Alzheimer's, vascular dementia. There's all these different types of dementia. But then we're also going to touch a little bit about some mental health as well, because they're actually linked together. So that's actually a very fascinating topic. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. Onoma. I'm a neurosurgery doctor at Townsville University Hospital. So this is a particular interest for me because a lot of our patients are at risk of dementia because of the injuries that they present with. So this is very, very special in my heart. But before we proceed, I would like to thank the Aikenville Church for having me here to do this series. And just in keeping with that tradition, I'd like to just invite all of you to bow our heads in prayer before we begin. Heavenly Father, great God of the universe, Father, Lord, we're so grateful, Lord, that you've given us all this information for our edification. We found out, Lord, that you care about our physical health as much as you care about our spiritual health. So, Lord, we are so thankful, Lord, of your love and care. And, Father, that you've given us all these principles that we can find in your word. Father, help us, Lord, to focus tonight. Help us, Lord, to get the most out of this information. And help us, Lord, to finish nice and strong. In the name of your Son, Christ Jesus, amen. Now, we all know this man, don't we? President Ronald Reagan. President Ronald Reagan was a very celebrated surgeon. Oh, no, sorry, celebrated president. Sorry, I'm picking surgeon. He was a celebrated president, especially from the Republic. A lot of the Republicans view him very affectionately. The 40th president of the United States served between 1981 to 1989, oversaw some of the crucial moments of world history, including the fall of Berlin Wall, the fall of communism. Very celebrated president. But did you know that he kept a very dark secret? Did you know that he kept a very dark secret? And it turns out that after his presidency, his son admitted on national television that his father actually had, signs of early onset dementia during his first term as a president. Did you know that? So around 3 years into his presidency, he had symptoms of what doctors believed that had dementia, and they even had physicians who would go through his debate performances and be like, yeah, that's telltale signs of dementia right there. Yet somehow he managed to have a very successful presidency, and it just begs the question: is dementia all what we think of it? Like, for example, people think when you have dementia, they think of the worst. Is it possible that we cannot just halt the progress of dementia, but even reverse dementia? Is it possible? And that's something that I like to, just give a little bit of a taste test as to see, the things that we're going to be talking about tonight and some of the interesting research that's out there on how we can halt dementia. But this is very, very fascinating that even someone like that, and even in recent times, there have been questions about the state of, Trump's mental, cognitive abilities, or Joe Biden. That's been, it's very common that a lot of these presidents try to keep that hush-hush. They don't like that, open in the public because it doesn't look good for their image. But, it's just interesting to see that how someone, very prominent could live with dementia. But I could not help, when we think of dementia, we think of forgetfulness, like forgetting your keys, right? But, I could not help but think of, the spiritual significance of that. Because dementia, as some of you guys have gleaned through the series, a lot of these lifestyle conditions, because dementia is a lifestyle condition, hint, hint, as we've discussed with all the other conditions we talked about during the week. And it's a disease of affluence, isn't it? A lot of the disease, like we looked at the China study, there's disease of affluence and there's disease of poverty. It's very hard to find, the people who live very simple lifestyles in these, third world countries. You rarely hear about dementia, but it's very common in the United States. It's very common in Australia and in the developed world. But similarly to, physical forgetfulness, spiritual forgetfulness has the same risk factors because I don't know if you guys have noticed, but as we become products of God's grace, it is easy to forget where the blessings come from. It's easy to relax. It's easy to kind of, hold off the brakes. And we tend to, there's a tendency to have a bit of spiritual decline as a result of the blessings and everything that's happening. And some of the examples that you guys, I'm sure, are very familiar with history is examples like Sodom and Gomorrah, the issues with the flood. People, they were so prosperous that they just forgot about God. We're doing well. Who needs God anyway? Very similar to our Western society today. The issues with the Israelites. that God really warned them as they were entering to the to Canaan, that was a problem they could face. And even prophetically, there's a last day church called the Church of Laodicea, which actually suffers the same problem. So it's very pertinent to us today. And then, Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 10 to 14 gives the warning to the Israelites as they were coming out of Egypt. It says, "When you have eaten and are full, then you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you." And the rest of the verse talks about how, remember where you've come from. All right, so I think that's part of the antidote is that when we recognize the blessings that we've given, the tendency is that when we have beautiful houses, our health is great, the tendency is to forget about God. But God warns about that, and I think we should be very conscious of that as well, even today. Now, dementia. Dementia is playing a massive toll in our society today. Let's go through the numbers. Do you know that dementia in Australia, this is Australian statistics we're talking about right now, it's the second leading cause of death in Australia. Do you know that? More than cancer. So if you look at the top light blue line, the top line, that's cardiovascular disease, that's heart attacks, that's strokes and things like that. So, that's expected. It's always it used to be cardiovascular disease, heart disease, and cancer were competing who's the number one cause of death. But now, actually, dementia has leapfrogged cancer. All cancers combined, dementia is actually the leading cause of death in Australia, and that is a mind-boggling statistic. Now, approximately 10 new people, by the time you go home tonight, 10 new people would have been diagnosed with dementia. Do you know that? 10 new people. That is a staggering number. That is a staggering number. And as you can imagine, because we've all heard about the Australian aging population, what a toll, the economic toll, people are finding hard, I'm sure a lot of people can relate, finding hard to find nursing homes for their aged loved ones because it's full to the max, it's becoming, and it's not going to get any easier, it's just getting worse, especially if 10 new people are getting diagnosed. So this is a staggering toll, and it's something that it's affecting the rest of the world as well. But I think some of us, we tend to think that dementia is just part of, aging, isn't it? It's just part of, you just grow old and, before you know it, eventually, you might have dementia, you might not. We just kind of almost think of it like that. But actually, I want us to change our thinking with that. Dementia is not part of aging. I want to categorically say that is false. Because actually, yes, it is true, as we get older, the natural process of getting older is that, yes, our bodies, we're not as strong as what we used to be. Surprise, surprise. But there's a reason why, they don't have professional NBA players, basketball players that are in their 50s, but, usually that you're stretching it into your 40s and then you retire because you're not as strong and athletic as you used to be. And that's because our muscles contain mitochondria, and over time, as the cells divide, those mitochondria deplete, But not so with the brain. Not so with the brain. Actually, your brain maintains its mitochondria. It actually stays the same. So actually, because of that, the same metabolic processes are still going on throughout life. So I like to put an emphatic stop to this lie that, having dementia is just an inevitable result of life. Let us not indulge in that folly. So let us just establish what we're dealing with when we're talking about dementia. Dementia is not just about memory loss. Many people first think memory loss, but it's much more than that. First of all, let's look at what do we consider to be intelligence. Intelligence is when you learn, you retain that information, your ability to retain, and then your ability to apply that knowledge. Those are all the ingredients of learning, okay? Now, when our ability to retain information depletes, eventually, during the early stages of dementia, you get personality changes. Some of you guys may relate to that. Maybe you have family members that have mild cognitive impairment and progressing towards dementia. Then it's like, hey, you're not yourself anymore. You're behaving in a way that's not you. And that's one of the most confronting things for family members. Okay, then there's a behavioral and psychological component as well. There's a mental health component. Do you know that? There's a behavioral and psychological component. So it's a very comprehensive condition. So you have, issues with learning, retaining, and applying knowledge. Then you have personality changes. Then you have behavioral and psychological issues. You find that a lot of people with dementia, they suffer from depression. They no longer have the same interest and excitement of things that they used to. And that's a very common observation. And also, when you get to the late signs, those are the early signs. When you get to the late signs, you get loss of ability, you get incontinence, in other words, just putting it frankly. You get urinary and stool incontinence. And that's when you get to that stage, that's, you're really advanced. The horse is already bolted, so to speak. And then, once you progress further, one of the things that's very commonly noted is irritability and agitation, and even anger. They even swearing. They don't even, they're saying things that they're not normally used to say. So that can be very confronting. I used to remember when I was an emergency doctor in Bundaberg, I was treating a patient who was presenting with new diagnosis of dementia, and just the distraught in the family member's face. I still remember her face. It's just ingrained, in my mind. Just saying this is not like, it's just like being with a different person. It's just very confronting. It's like a complete stranger, and so that is very, very confronting for people. So they say we talked about 10 new people in Australia diagnosed with dementia every hour. Actually, do you know that every 3 seconds, a new person is diagnosed with dementia throughout the whole world? So as a result, the World Health Organization has recognized this as a very big problem that is only going to get worse. So back in 2017, they implement a whole kind of strategy to try and curb the epidemic, so to speak. And so, first of all, it starts with a policy level. It's a top-down approach, policy level, increasing awareness. And this is why programs like this is really important, to get the awareness out and, get rid of all the misconceptions and things like that. And then it's all, dealing with risk reduction. Early diagnosis and treatment is key. Early diagnosis and treatment. Support for the carers is crucial, because it's often the carer is a huge burden for the carers when they're dealing with loved ones with dementia. So they recognize that as key. And make sure that there's health information systems in place to deal with the increased demand. And of course, research and innovation. And we're going to talk about some of the groundbreaking research dealing with dementia tonight. So let's talk about memory. We can't talk about dementia without going into a bit more detail about memory. So there's 3 types of memory, okay? So the first type is working memory. Okay, so that working memory, that's the memory that we all need to concentrate. So it's located in your frontal lobe of your brain, the front of your brain. So we all need working memory so that we're able to, when someone, you meet a new person and you want to quickly jot down their phone number, and you just want to, get it in your brains and then move on with your life, so to speak. You need that working memory. It's something that we use all the time. It's also the area of your brain where your attention span is crucial. That's where your attention span. And the good thing with working memory, that's the area of your brain where we're directly involved with, we can actually improve. You can improve your working memory. Did you know that? You can improve your working memory. But that working memory lasts for about a minute. And there are different ways to, try and maximize that minute, which is, using associations to memorize things. They say 2 or more associations is good to memorize things. Putting things in groups is helpful in memorizing things. So that's important for attention span and concentration. Now, the next step after that, once you've put enough effort, put enough concentration into what you're trying to memorize, you then go to the next form of memory called short-term memory. Now, that memory is located in the temporal lobe, just behind your ears. Where your ears are, that's where your temporal lobe resides. That's where your short-term memory resides. And that can last between minutes to weeks. Now, we have a lot of university students on this, that attend this, this church, and I'm sure they utilize that short-term memory when they're cramming there for their exams, a couple of weeks before. So that's very, very, they're very, very appreciative of that short-term memory. And there's a specific part of your temporal lobe which is located in the middle aspect of your temporal lobe. So if we go a bit more center of your brain, but the middle aspect of your temporal lobe, there's a part of your brain called the hippocampus. Now, the job of the hippocampus is to activate and retrieve your short-term memory. It's the activating to retrieve your short-term memory. And of course, the things that activates and retains are things like things that are novel. Things that are novel. What do we mean by novel? Think new things, exciting things. That tends to help stimulate the short-term memory. If it's something that is a bit boring or dry, it's very easy to go in one ear and out the other. The other aspect of it as well is things, maybe stressful situations. Whenever you've gone through a stressful situation, it's very easy to memorize things. That's some of the signaling pathways, especially it's very intimately linked with your limbic system, that helps with activating that short-term memory. And then once it's activated sufficiently, it then goes down to your long-term memory, which is where we all want. And that long-term memory is stored in your cerebral cortex. So it's stored all over your brain in the top layer of your brain called the cerebral cortex, which is like your hardware of your brain. Like the concentration of brain power is right at the cerebral cortex, right at the cerebral cortex. And that lasts a lifetime. And let me give you an example. Some people, when you're a kid, you learn how to ride a bicycle, and it's a milestone, isn't it, for children? They learn how to ride a bicycle, they get off their training wheels and they ride a bicycle. But sometimes you may never, once you become an adult, you're driving more often, you may never ride a bicycle for years. And then eventually you start, I want to get fit, I want to start riding a bicycle. But, it's not like you forget how to ride a bicycle. You just crack on as if you've never stopped riding a bicycle. That's the long-term memory actively at work there. So it's a very powerful thing. And that's why we often find that dementia patients, some of them can memorize events from years ago, but their short-term memory is shocking. So that's why it's such a powerful thing. But often it just needs a little bit of stimulation to get that long-term memory activated. So it's stored in your long-term memory, but often, as it says here, it can be very difficult to retrieve it, especially in cases of dementia. It can be very difficult to retrieve that information. So this is just a kind of a summary of what we've just talked about. This is your top diagram. This is what your normal anatomy looks like. This is your healthy brain. This is that hippocampus that I was talking about in the medial aspect of your temporal lobe. It's nice and healthy and full. And then this is what a healthy neuron looks like. Look how nice and plump the axon, which is that tail part of the cell, looks like. And very healthy looking dendrites on the cell body. That's what it looks like. But then when it's diseased, you see that actually the hippocampus actually shrinks because there's not enough, it is inappropriate stimuli. And then even the axons, the lining, like almost like the insulation of your wiring starts to break down and it's not conducting as efficiently. So you're a bit more slower. You're not as sharp as you used to be. And then you even have evidence of inflammation, which is where you see that plaques, those red dots on the end of the cell, as you can see. Those are the plaques, which is a result of metabolism and inflammation. So now we see how robust and beautiful how God has created this amazing nervous system and how its ability to memorize things, even if you haven't looked at it before for a long time. We've seen how amazing this anatomy is, but it's very easy to have memory loss. Do you know that? It's very easy to have memory loss. If you're not careful, I said that age is, yes, the older you get, the more likely you have dementia, but that's just because we accumulate all these bad lifestyle habits that lead to dementia. So let's look at some of the risks one by one. So one of the risks of having memory loss is the studies show, this is all studies-based, studies show that being a high school dropout is a risk factor for dementia. Being a high school dropout is a risk factor for dementia. And also not graduating in university is also a risk factor for dementia. What that means is that we must be actively learning new things. So even if you don't have a background in university education or you're a high school dropout, you can still learn like a university student, isn't it? And that's the beautiful thing about being a Christian is that we're encouraged to study the Bible. The Bible is such a complex book, it's so rich with history and complex theology and also simple theology, but there's something for everyone, and we're encouraged to read our Bibles every day, so you're always activating the brain. But also I just remember when I was a medical student, I did another degree before medicine, and I just remember, like feeling, a little bit, uncertain of myself, whether I can go through it. But then there's this, 65-year-old also in the same class doing medicine with me. I'm like, oh, well, if they can do it, then why not, you know? Like, so it's like, you know, everyone, what I'm trying to say is it's never too late to learn new things, isn't it? It's never too late to learn. So I encourage people to do courses online, you know, learn a new language. All these things are so important when it comes to ensuring that your brain is nice and active and robust. The other risk factor that makes it easy, that accelerates dementia, is being a couch potato. I'm sorry, like that's the easiest way to get dementia, is just, you know, doing nothing, you know, eating chips and just watching TV all the time. Studies have shown that's one of the easy ways to accelerate dementia. And watching TV, playing with devices, they say that if you do both, that's even worse. Doing both at the same time, you know, it's very common. You know, people are watching TV these days, or you know, their computer, and they'll also get distractions. They often say that when your brain is multitasking, it actually reduces your IQ at certain, you know, multiple points, and it's not an insignificant amount of points. Because, you know, your brain is designed to just concentrate on one thing and do a good job, you know, give your all and give your best. But when you're distracted, you've got your emails going off, and then then the kids are distracting you, and then you've got the TV on, and then, you know, that's just, your brain just is gonna cop it because of that, okay? Now, similarly, other distractions online. Let's get real deep. There's, you know, no mincing words here tonight. We're just gonna give you the facts, give you the data, okay? So constant chat or text, you know, if you're always distracted by your devices, looking up things online. Like, look, what it's saying is that we should challenge ourselves to try and memorize things. Let us not go straight to Dr. Google or Google or Wikipedia. Let us try and actually like learn things and try and retain it so that we don't always, you know, have this reflex of, you know, looking up things and, you know, trying to rely on our devices. And that's a challenge with the amazing technology out there. It's so easy to do that, isn't it? It's just in your touch of your fingertips. It's almost like baiting you to do that, you know? You almost feel silly not to do it, but actually we should resist that temptation, okay? So checking your emails constantly, watching YouTube, consumption of pornographic material, or doing a combination of two. What that does, actually, studies have shown, they've compared MRI scans of people who are addicted to that kind of stuff and people who are not addicted. They find that people who are addicted to that kind of stuff, they can actually see the adverse brain changes. There's thinning of the cortex, the frontal cortex. And then if you look at, you know, someone with that is like an ice addict, they actually have the same brain changes. It's the same thing. So it's actually quite confronting when you see the scans. So that's very, very, very crucial that we avoid those things. Not exercising or being unfit, you know, getting that regular exercise is crucial in making sure that you don't accelerate dementia. Now, this is, like I said, we're not mincing words tonight. Unfortunately, people who engage in the habit of, you know, masturbation and things like, you know, frequent intercourse, because what that does is that we have a dopamine reward system. When we go through those extreme spikes in dopamine through like a lot of frequent engagement in that activity, or super stimuli, what they call super stimuli, which is hinted at the sodomy component of that, then actually what we do is you get those adverse brain changes. So there's actually, like we've talked about temperance last night when it comes to the immune system. You know, there's temperance, and temperance is, you know, being balanced in the good things, but also avoiding completely the bad things, okay? So that's very, very crucial. That's what the studies show, okay? Now, there's more. Always Googling to find answers, where we talked about it instead of memorizing. Eating lots of sugar. Now, look at this. Eating sugar accelerates dementia so much that they did a study where they compared someone who had a sugary drink and someone who just had water, and it actually results in 14 times the amount of free radicals in your brain. Did you know that? After a sugary drink compared to just drinking water. 14 times the amount of free radicals results in your brain as a result of drinking like sugary drinks. Eating too much cholesterol, we're going to go into a bit of depth into that. I had a very good question the other couple of nights ago about cholesterol, but that is actually one of the crucial instigators of accelerating dementia. So we're going to talk about that. Being overweight or obese, eating lots of salt because it leads to high blood pressure, as we discussed the other night, And high blood pressure is one of those other crucial X factors of resulting in dementia. So it's so important. I'm going to go into a little bit of depth into that tonight. So crucial. Right? And of course, smoking, marijuana, tobacco, alcohol, or a combination of all of those three is going to just accelerate dementia. Now, I'll be remiss if we don't talk about, we talked about the modifiable risk factors. So what I just talked about are all the things we can do to change. For completeness, let's talk about the things we can't change. We can't change our age, unfortunately, as much as we would like to go back in time. And unfortunately, studies show that female are more predilected towards dementia than men at a ratio of 2 to 1. Okay, so that's the sorry to break the news, ladies, but that's what the data shows. Okay. But there's hope. We're going to go through a plan of attack, okay, that we can not just halt dementia, but even reverse it, okay? Now, first things first, you have to start with a good history and examination. You need to find a good doctor who is clued on, who can do a thorough history and examination, okay? Because there's so many differential diagnoses that could explain things. There's mild cognitive impairment. There's all these other, delirium. There's all sorts of conditions. You have to rule out organic conditions, rule out mental health conditions. So it has to be a very thorough workup. Dementia is not something that you can treat yourself at home. This really needs to be taken seriously, and you need to see a good doctor to do a thorough history and examination. Now, before we go into in depth about that, I just want to talk about managing blood pressure. Now, there's a best-kept secret here, actually. Does anyone recognize that flower? Hibiscus. So it turns out that hibiscus is actually a very potent anti-blood pressure substance. Do you know that? So we recommend, doctors that are clued into this, recommend taking up to 3 cups a day if you have uncontrolled blood pressure. We need to do everything we can to get blood pressure under control, because that is an accelerator of dementia. So that's the reason why I'm mentioning this. You use every tool in your tool shed. Hibiscus is known to be a potent lowering of blood pressure. Now, what are the blood tests we need to look at? Very crucial. When you see your doctor, make sure your doctor does a full blood count, full blood work. Look at the electrolytes, include magnesium, sodium, glucose, and even HbA1c, because often without noticing, studies are showing that because some of your HbA1c, which is a marker of your overall sugar control over the last 3 months, as we discussed a couple of nights ago, actually that could be a pre-marker of dementia. So they're doing some studies that it could correlate. The higher the more uncontrolled your HbA1c, the more likely you'll have dementia. So that's very crucial. Thyroid function is a key. It should be part of the blood work, just to leave no stone unturned, okay? Just to leave no stone unturned. Inflammatory markers include CRP, which is the key inflammatory marker that we like to use to check for overall inflammation of the body, to see what the levels are. Your lipid and cholesterol profile, of course, because we've just hinted that cholesterol is crucial in developing dementia. Vitamin D levels is crucial. B12 and folate, they recommend your B12 to be above 500 and your folate to be about 515. Now just as a disclaimer here, people think that it's only vegetarians that suffer from B12 deficiency. I like to shut that down now, because actually 99% of people with B12 deficiency are actually people who are not vegetarians. Do you know that? So that's very crucial, that everyone has the risk of getting B12 deficiency, so that needs to be checked. And homocysteine levels, which is crucial in methylation. And what we mean by methylation, that's the process in which your body converts certain substances to produce certain neurochemicals. So it's the chemistry of your brain, so to speak. If you're a high methylated person or a low methylated person, then those are risk of dementia. So that's crucial that they test that as well for completion, okay? For completion. Now, let's go into the nitty-gritty. What are some of the things we can do to treat dementia, to halt the process? Well, any foods that are pigmented with blue or purple contain a substance called polyphenols. Polyphenols, otherwise called, the specific polyphenol is anthocyan, very rich in blueberries. They've found that actually people who consume polyphenols can actually halt if they incorporate in their diet can actually slow the progress of developing dementia. Okay. In fact, studies actually, they have a technical term for this. They call it blueberry supplementation. That's actually the official medical term for it, blueberry supplementation. So the reason why polyphenols is so effective is that it crosses your blood-brain barrier very readily, and it can be seen actually when they did pathology exams where someone has passed away for whatever reason, or they also did it in animal studies as well, where they've consumed a lot of polyphenols in that animal's lifetime, and then when they dissect the brain where that hippocampus, those memory centers are, it lights up as blue. Do you know that? It lights up as blue, and that's 3 hours after ingestion. So that shows that it's how potent it is in actually halting the process of memory impairment. And the studies have shown that it does improve memory in older adults, particularly, because they tend to do those studies in the older population. Specific other foods as well as Concord grapes is known to improve verbal learning, okay, and it's also rich in anthocyanins. We don't have this variety of grape, for what I understand. Correct me if I'm wrong. Does anyone who's familiar with the grape industry? I got the impression that we don't have this variety of grapes in Australia, so you may have to find a way to get maybe like a supplement version or something like that, this specific variety of grapes anyway. So they looked at a study that shows that blueberries and strawberries, this is a study that was published, blueberries and strawberries decreases cognitive decline by 2.5 years in older women. Do you know that? Blueberries having regular consumption, and what they did in that study, it wasn't a high consumption. All they did was they gave 2 servings of strawberries a week and 1 serving of blueberries a week to the intervention, and then they just did a control group. And then what it shows is that it decreased cognitive decline by 2.5 years. Now, it's so easy. Like, who knows what the effect is if you have it every day? That was just 2 servings of strawberries a week, 1 serving of blueberries a week. Imagine what the effect is. If you can get that with 2.5 years, imagine what you get if you eat it like every day. Just make it as part of your daily breakfast. Like, that's very powerful stuff. Very powerful stuff. Now, another interesting chemical that is found in these type of foods is called resveratrol, which is present in grapes and strawberries. And actually, do you know that it acts as a brain fertilizer? Let me explain what I mean by that. So what it does is that it improves neurogenesis, so which means that the nerve cells, their ability to develop an expression of this molecule called BDNF mRNA in the hippocampus, and they found that out in mice studies. So it's actually, you can actually, especially with the knowledge of neuroplasticity, and this is like groundbreaking stuff that actually improves neurogenesis. So it's, in a way, you can think of it as brain fertilizer. If you want to, the more grapes and strawberries you eat, now I'm not saying to overdo it, but just to give you the idea of the power of these superfoods. Now, the things that are bad for you, high saturated fat in the diet is the equivalent of 6 years of brain aging. Do you know that? High saturated fat in the diet is equivalent to 6 years of brain aging. That is devastating. So it is very, important for us to ascertain why and how we can curb this, how we can avoid saturated fat in our diets then. And the way we can do that is understanding this equation called the Keyes equation. Okay? Now, don't get too overwhelmed by this. It's actually very simple. It's a relationship between cholesterol and saturated fat. Now, I had a very good question that was asked about how the variables, how diet plays in the concentration of cholesterol in our body. And this is actually a very good explanation of this, in that it shows that your cholesterol, your cholesterol in your body is predicted, which is the predicted change of cholesterol in your blood concentration, is proportional to the change in percentage of dietary energy from saturated fats, as well as the difference between that and the change in dietary energy from the polyunsaturated fats. Okay, and then you have these constants that make. So what that shows is that, notice how there's a number before the triangle in S, which just means change in S. There's a 2 in front of it. So what that shows is that we want to have more polyunsaturated fats, isn't it, in our diet rather than saturated. So that means to overcome it, we need to have twice as much. So the ratio between the P and the S needs to be 2 to 1. So that means, what that means is that translation is that we need to find foods that have the proper balance between the polyunsaturated fats and the saturated fats. So let's find out what those foods are. Let's go through the animal side of things. So if you go down to the bottom, so what we want is for that PS ratio that I was talking about to be above 2. So far, the best case scenario is that there's certain fish that are very close to that. Okay, if you look right at the top, certain fish, and often they recommend like turkey over the other types of meat. Milk is terrible. That's going to increase your cholesterol. So easy. Cheese will increase your cholesterol. Beef, obviously, any animal product will increase your cholesterol. But if you're going to have animal products, they recommend fish as the best source of reducing the cholesterol that ends up in your blood. Now let's look at the plant foods. Now, it's much more easier to get it above 2 with certain plant foods, and there's some superfoods out there. And if you look at the top, if you can't see, there's walnut has a ratio of 6.9. So that is way, way, way over number 2. So that's going to help reduce your cholesterol even. So that's actually a positive influence in reducing your cholesterol. If you want to reduce your cholesterol, we encourage you to eat more walnuts, more almonds, more pecans, and hickory nut. So yeah, that's now. If you look at the bottom, there's some things that maybe that's a bit more that's also familiar, which is coconut oil and palm oils, those tropical oils. Yeah, those, even though it's plant food, we have to be careful with eating too much of that, because that's actually, people think, oh, it's a plant food, you can eat as much as you want, but actually look how low the ratio is. It's way below 2, isn't it? So that will definitely, having a lot of coconut, especially coconut oil, will increase your cholesterol very, very easily. Now let's look at omega-3. Omega-3 reduces your risk of dementia especially in the context of traumatic brain injury. Now, traumatic brain injury is my area of interest, because that's what we see. That's a lot of our patients have traumatic brain injury. And so as a result of recovering from their injury, yes, we do the surgery if they need it, and they go through rehabilitation, but they're at risk of dementia over the long term. So the things that we can do to mitigate that is having a lot of omega-3, because omega-3 is a natural anti-inflammatory. And it increases that BDNF mRNA, that is that so-called fertilizer that I was talking about. Okay. What are the foods that increase omega-3? Chia seeds. Chia seeds is the top food that is very, very rich in omega-3. Very, very rich. It's literally a superfood. Walnuts, again, is another suspect. Soybean oil, green soybeans, all rich with omega-3. So get that in your diet. Now, does anyone recognize this plant? What is that? Who said saffron? Very, very good. Very good. So it is saffron. So you can see the parts of the flower that make up the saffron. And that is shown to be a very potent anti-inflammatory, very potent food for preventing dementia. Okay, so I just wanted to put that out there as a special insider. Now, we talked about how depression and anxiety. Now, they say that with depression, if you have depression in your 20s and 30s, you are 3 times at risk of developing dementia in your 60s. Do you know that? So it's crucial. So they did a study. They did a study looking at this, where they compared people who ate a lot of animal-based foods versus who are more plant-based, and they showed a significant decrease in depression and anxiety and stress in those on the plant-based food. And the reason that they discovered was because they had a low amount of arachidonic acid, which is known to, according to studies, known to induce depression and anxiety. So it just shows that actually depression and anxiety is very much, it's not just in your head, isn't it? It's very much a biochemical process. And these are some of the foods, it's in the Australian context, that are high in arachidonic acid. No surprise, it's all animal foods, including our emblems that are on the top there. Now, I'll be remiss, talking about a big topic like this without talking about music therapy, especially for late-stage Alzheimer's disease. There's some good studies that shows that when they did two groups of patients. They did one group of patient where all they did was listen to classical music, and then they did another group where they actually learned to play the violin and listen to classical music, and they found that it decreased cognitive decline in those patients that were listening and learning to play classical music. So violin lessons, who would have thought? That's how crucial it is in halting dementia. Now, just before we close, I need to talk about fasting. Fasting is a game changer when it comes to holding off Alzheimer's disease. Because what they found that intermittent fasting increases the production of that fertilizer that I was talking about, that BDNF, and you can get that increase just by doing intermittent fasting daily for 12 hours a day. So what that means is that you have, breakfast and lunch, and then you just skip dinner. And then if you have just 2 meals a day, that's intermittent fasting, and you get the benefit of this effect. So 12 hours a day is enough to get an increase, but if you do 17 hours, which you can easily do with having just breakfast and lunch, you get a very powerful effect. And so they call this, in the medical terminology, time-restricted feeding. And the reason why it's effective is that it induces ketosis. Now, I'm sure you guys have heard of the word ketosis before. When you think of ketosis, you think of the ketogenic diet. But actually, the ketogenic diet, it's, because it's a lot of the time when their version of ketogenic diet is rich in animal foods, it's not as beneficial. But actually, you can induce ketosis simply by being on a vegetarian diet without having to miss out on anything, by having breakfast and lunch and then just skipping dinner. If you can do that by still maintaining your body weight. So that's crucial, because if you do active work, doing a lot of hard yakka, then you don't want to be skipping on that third meal because you just lose weight. And they found that in breast cancer patients, an aside benefit is that it reduces the risk of cancer returning markedly. So that's crucial. So just in conclusion, I'd like to finish with these two verses. God's antidote and prevention strategy for spiritual forgetfulness is very similar to physical forgetfulness. And it says in Revelation chapter 2, verse 5, in Revelation chapter 2, it talks about all these different churches that go down through history, which are symbolic of the phases of church history. And it says that, as a part of the remedy, it says, therefore remember from where you have fallen and repent and do the deed you did at first. So, if we have a bit of a spiritual lull, just remember what you did at first. Remember what sparked that, interest in spirituality, that interest, that spiritual growth in the first place. That's, pretty good advice. And Hebrews chapter 8, verse 10 says, for this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my laws into their minds and write them on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. What an encouragement that God actually is the one that will end up writing the laws on our heart, isn't it? It's not something that we have to, worry about or struggle and things like that. Yes, it is, spiritual battle, but God actually is the one who's leading the charge, and we just have to cooperate with him. So thank you so much for being good listeners. It is now time for a brief question and answer. And sorry, this was a very meaty, big lecture, but I thought it's weekend. I thought I could get away with it a little bit. Yeah. So anyone have any questions?
Just real quick with cholesterol, when you're talking about foods that helps decrease cholesterol, would you say that, for example, if you had meat but then substituted that on top of with vegetables, if that makes a net negative and then a net positive, would they subtract from each other and suddenly it wouldn't be a bad thing at all?
Yeah, I guess theoretically, mathematically, yeah, that's technically yes. But then, especially in the context of the entirety, because like we said at the beginning of the series, the human body is so complex. And yes, we're talking about in the context of dementia, but eating animal foods also increases other risks as well. So, yes, you could probably get away with supplementing and using it as a supplement approach if you're still on an animal-based diet. Just make sure that you have a high amount of, walnuts and, chia seeds and all those good foods, with your omega-3. Yes, that theoretically, yes, but at the same time, the best ways is a plant-based approach. That's like a health insurance policy, so to speak. If we've embraced that, then you're going to cut down the risk of not just cholesterol and dementia, which is a risk factor for it, but also other diseases. So, but yeah, that's technically yes. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Any other questions?
Sorry, I just have one here at the back, and I'll let you guys have it. Earlier, you mentioned something about spending a lot of time in front of a screen. I don't have a TV, I don't watch anything, but my work requires me to be in front of a laptop for sometimes 12 hours, even longer. Is that the same as the other screens, or is it different effects?
It's not the same, because what you're doing in front of the laptop, it's not, because the problem is with screens, especially with the advent of TikTok and Shorts and YouTube, like it's designed to reduce your attention span. So as long as what you're working with is not like the content is changing rapidly, as long as you're involved in concentration, because these technologies, they're not they're necessarily bad. It's just that the way they're designed, it's designed to be addictive. It's designed to lure you in and doom scrolling, as they call it. So yeah, that's fine. It's not necessarily the screen itself, but it's what you're doing with it. Yeah. Oh yeah, we have some questions at the front. Okay. Yeah, then we. Oh, sorry, we'll go you next.
Thanks. What you seem to be describing is sort of a lazy brain with TikTok. I'm wondering about activating the brain and still in entertainment mode. Like, I've had recommendations of crossword puzzles or Scrabble. What other intellectual recreational activities would you suggest?
Yeah, those are fantastic options.
Yeah.
So Sudoku is very great as well. It's a fantastic option. Yeah, Scrabble. Also, just I think what we're losing as well in society is that we're not interacting with people as much as we used to. So when you're engaging that part of your brain, that's you're engaging in conversation and you're playing those games in the context of other people, that's what's also gives a lot of health benefits too, because you're creating oxytocin, all these rich chemicals that are important for brain function. But also you're also developing critical thinking and listening to other people. There's so many multifaceted. That is a much healthier way to engage that hippocampus than simply doom scrolling and things like that, which is way more passive.
Sorry, I hope you don't mind. I was trying to take some notes, but it's pretty hard to keep up.
Yeah, sorry.
Is the information available in a product, a book, or notes, or online?
What I mean, it is recorded.
Is
It's
it?
recorded. Yeah, it is recorded. So we can, one of us will send you a link if you like.
Yeah.
And we can jot down your details and send you the link to the web. It's got all the other recordings in case you've missed the other ones are
Yeah.
also there as well. Yeah.
That
So
would
you
be
find
wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you can always pause it, speed it up if I
Yeah.
speak too slow or whatever. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you very
that's-
much.
my pleasure.
I had another thought of. I'll let someone else go, but I've
Sure.
got another question.
Okay. Sure.
I noticed that they've been advertising Servinade, which is some type of, it doesn't stop dementia, but it can kind of help just slow it down a bit. Is that
Okay.
true or not?
What? Can you say that again?
It's called Servinade. It's
Servinade.
some medicine that's been advertising on the TV.
Yeah, okay. I'm not too familiar with that, but one thing I wanted to mention is that even the best pharmacological agents out there, the studies showing that saffron was just as good as the market-leading medication. I'm not too privy because a lot of that is our neurology colleagues deal with that more often than us, but yeah, I'm not too familiar with Servinade, to be honest, and the efficacy of that. But yeah, I'll look into it. Yeah.
Yes, you mentioned that one type of food that can increase the risk of dementia was milk and cheese. And my question is, if I like eating healthy cereal like oatmeal or muesli, would it be safer if I have skim milk, or would it be even safer if I had almond milk or soy milk or oat milk?
Sure. That's a good question. Just going back to that slide. So, yeah, so you can see that, if it's less than 2, milk is significantly low in terms of its ranking as among animal foods. But if you substitute it with, even though it doesn't have almond milk there, yeah, but it's got almonds, I could deduce that it's going to be the same ratio, even though it's going to be more refined. That would be a much better substitute. That would not just, prevent further cholesterol buildup, but even reduce it. Yeah, so I would highly recommend. Skim milk is not a bad idea because you're going to remove a lot of the fat that's component with full cream milk, but it's still going to be high in cholesterol in spite of that. Yeah. Yeah, but yeah, it could be a good place to start as a transition, but yeah, highly encourage the nut-based milks for sure, the plant-based milks. Yeah. And often people they're not used to the taste, but you develop I just remember my sister, she had eczema and she was allergic to dairy, so the whole family, irrespective of whether we were allergic or not, just went on soy milk, almond milk, and you get used to it, and it's actually some really good varieties out there. Yeah. Right at the back. And then we'll go to, after that, okay, so we'll go after you.
Yes. So sometimes people think that it's to do with inheritance. You've inherited from your parents. Is that how do you say, what do you say about that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, with the studies I've seen, family history, it's not even a main non-modifiable risk factor, actually. Yeah, so the two main non-modifiable risk factors is age and gender, unfortunately. But yeah, family history doesn't play a big player. It's not a big player when it comes to dementia. Yeah. We've got right at the back. Oh, you've got, oh, yeah, awesome.
My question is sort of similar to Celine's. So I'm on my computer all day at work, and sometimes I'm doing really tedious tasks that I'm like, this is too boring. So I pop my headphones on and I'm either listening to music or a podcast, and I sometimes do that regularly. Does that have any negative, effects on the brain if you're doing something on a computer while listening, to a podcast or music?
While working?
While working, yes.
While working, yeah. I mean, technically, I know, and the thing is, a lot of people do this. This is very common practice. But technically, it is a form of distraction. Whether it lays down the processes of dementia, it's not very clear from that specific example. But certainly, it may reduce technically, depending on the type of music you're listening to as well. If you're listening to classical music, it's probably a good effect, good benefit. But if you're listening to types of more syncopated rhythms, it's probably going to be more of a distraction and actually will reduce your performance in that task, so to speak, based on the studies anyway. So yeah, I don't have any specific data on that scenario, but yeah, just deducing from the other aspects. Yeah.
Yeah, my question is, does this apply to everybody, including the children, or is just for adults?
Does it apply to the children?
Yes.
Absolutely. Like we talked about, even though a lot of the studies, they did it in, the elderly community, but the fact is, mild cognitive impairment, I don't know if you've heard of early onset dementia. Yeah, that's even before 60, it can occur. So the sooner these habits are, engaged, the less likely you are in laying down the foundations for dementia. Because dementia is not something that happens like this. It's a lifelong progression. It's a chronic process. So it needs time. And usually it starts, the bad effect starts from when you're young. So even when I mentioned about depression, like I said, in your 20s and even 30s, 3 times the risk of developing dementia in your 60s, which is now becoming early onset. So if we can curb dementia in that, even in your 20s, then yeah, we're going to be on our way to curbing it and reversing it.
I've heard also of plastics where people are microwaving with plastics and they cut the brains and they're finding a lot of high plastic stuff in the brain.
Plastic, interesting. I haven't looked into that, to be honest. Yeah, but it's an interesting thought because
Nowadays,
it's so
everything's in
ubiquitous.
plastic now.
Yeah. I have to. Yeah, to be honest, I don't have any good data for that. But yeah, it's fascinating given how ubiquitous plastics are. With everything we consume and yeah. I'll have to look at it. Yeah, but yeah, good thought. Yeah.
I would. It's very important not to consume anything from the Tetra Paks.
Okay.
High poison, and also the plant milks tend to have oils in them which are hydrogenated. So once you hydrogenate your plant fats, you actually create basically a plastic. I was wondering if so the quality of the fats, not whether it's saturate or whatever, and the range is what's important. And shouldn't eat any single hydrogenated, processed hydrogenated fat, such as margarine, etc. Really bad news. Can I ask you if you would revise the PS ratio? Is that polyunsaturated versus saturate, or what did I miss?
Yeah, so it's
Could
polyunsaturated.
you go back and show us what?
Sure. So if we go back to that equation, so this is the equation that explains, because you asked this amazing question, is how, what role diet plays in cholesterol in our body. It shows that cholesterol is directly proportional to the polyunsaturated fat, which is P, and then the saturated fat. And then you can see that, because of the constant, which was derived from a gentleman by the name of Keyes, the 2 is right next to the S. So that means to overcome the S, you need to have twice as much polyunsaturated fat and saturated fat before it accumulates in your body, because it's directly proportional. So therefore, the PS ratio, we can derive that the PS ratio is important because that's what you need to overcome the balance to make sure you don't accumulate cholesterol. So that's why all these foods that have low PS ratio means that you're bound to accumulate cholesterol if you eat, and most of it is plant foods, and most of it is animal foods, sorry. But then the plant foods, you can get a lot of good foods that actually decrease your cholesterol because the ratio is so powerful. As you can see, walnuts, this has a ratio of 7, which is much, much higher than 2.
I'd say regarding the ratio thing, you have to remember as well, if you've got a balanced diet, you're getting your overall ratio. It always comes down to quality, the quality of your fats especially. Can you talk about different types of cholesterol?
How about
there's the good and bad.
How about, do you mind if I chat with you later? We can go into detail of that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question. Okay, we'll do a couple more questions.
Oh, sorry. I'm just interested because I nursed in an aged care place for a few years, and I spent quite a bit of time in the dementia ward. And I found it really interesting, the moments of lucidity that people would have, and people that were, there was a lady in particular, she would walk around with a little suitcase saying, "Mummy and Daddy's coming to pick me up." She was like in her 90s, and she was saying, "Mummy and Daddy's coming to pick me up." And then the next minute you could be sitting there having a conversation with her. The first time I came across it was a woman that I had been nursing for over 12 months, and she was not even she couldn't speak anything. She was completely bedridden, had to be fed, couldn't speak. And then one day we were in there changing her, and she starts talking about what was happening on TV, and oh, look at this, and and it was the first time I'd ever experienced it. And one of the doctor actually came, asked about it. I was like, what's going on? And he said, unfortunately, because I was like, wow, she's cured, she's fixed. And he said, unfortunately, that can just be prior to the end of her life, which turned out it was, sadly. But that's really, do you know anything about that? Because it wasn't actually discussed.
Yeah, sure. Just a brief schematic, the the first thing that goes is memory, like short-term memory. Because of the way the long-term memory is produced, that seems to be the thing that doesn't, like anecdotally, like with the patients I've seen, it doesn't readily go. It's the last thing that seems to go. They seem to be able to remember, pertinent moments of their lives and things like that. Yeah, like I don't know the exact pathophysio why they have these, periods of lucidity, intense lucidity right before they decline. But often the general principle, as I've said at the beginning, the memory loss, the behavior change, the psychological changes, and then the personality, the agitation kicks in. It's when we grade the severity. But yeah, that kind of unique phenomena of that, lucidity peak and then decline, I have to look into a bit more detail into that. But yeah, that's interesting observation.
There's about a few things I would like to get your confirmation.
Sure.
Just now the gentleman mentioned about Sudoku. From my conversation with a lot of old people, this generation, they play a lot of games on the mobile phone. Now, I myself play Sudoku, so I understand what's going on. Now I start to slow down with Sudoku because I know what's going on there. People think that, that will make them smart, right? But actually, especially you play with mobile phone, you actually use less brain. Because there are a lot of repetition. You try to look for one, and where's another one, two, and all that. And most of people, they don't develop the strategies. That's another thing. Game, there are two things. You use in a routine way. If you play in a routine way, you don't develop the new strategies. Your brain get repetition and doesn't, not simulated enough. So you need to have other games too. But if you go to another games and then you go into the same strategy all the time, you don't develop new strategy, then your brain get what you call stagnant. Yeah. So the way I do, I will record the time. I will try to make it faster each time. That show that my brain going to work much faster. That's about the games, okay? And also I agree with you that it's better to play games in the group because you can interact with other people.
Absolutely.
And also you also use a social skill with people too. And it's good for your mood, right? Instead of playing by yourself. Also, instead of using mobile phone, you play games on the paper. They have a lot of Sudoku books or Code Breaker. At the moment, I'm playing Code Breaker, and I try to make my time as little as possible, as short as possible. So that means I force myself to think about strategy, and also use memory too. That hey, that's actually happen more often or whatever. Okay, that's about the games. Okay, because a lot of people nowadays they try to get better with their brain, but it's a myth when you go into that too much. The things that about learn new thing, I find that people in my generation, we have learned a lot of new things. Actually, we go into overload information, overstimulation. Am I right?
Look, I guess the point I was making with the new thing is that that's the most potent strategy to stimulate the hippocampus. So if you want to encourage a robust learning pathway, it's just introducing something novel, every now and then. I'm not saying necessarily that, especially if it's a really advanced case, often they recommend, familiarity, like a familiar environment, familiar faces, making sure that there's not too many differences and things like that, in their routine. That's the traditional treatment that we use. But, in terms of, fostering learning, especially if it's in a mild cognitive impairment stage, if it's a mild form of cognitive impairment, then absolutely, I think I would highly encourage just learning new things and just engaging that hippocampus a bit more that way.
But if someone has the opposite issue, like overstimulated, overload information, would it be better? For example, my husband, he knows so many languages, and he want to learn more. He want to go. He learned the new song in new languages, but actually he start to forget my language. That he need to communicate with me, or even English, some English word, because it's overloaded. So am I right that I try another strategy instead of increase the new information or new stimulation. Come back to recall. You're talking about hippocampus, right? That used for retrieve information. If we don't use it, for example, if we remember something and we come back to recall it. So instead of click on the Google, what's the meaning of this word? What is that? Before you do that, you think first.
Absolutely.
Then when I forget something nowadays, I try to tell myself, I'm not going to ask somebody to help me. I'm going to be calm. I'm going to calm down and reconnect, right? Connect with this and that. Gradually, it come back. The memory come back. Yes,
the long term.
That's what I want to ask. That's what I don't know. I'm trying this strategy to recall the memory.
Sure.
Okay.
I think that's a fantastic strategy. Just briefly, I think that's why it's really crucial to work closely with a doctor that's very privy, very interested and knowledgeable in these type of cases, because it really depends on what spectrum and what part of the continuum you are in your cognitive impairment. Severe cognitive impairment, I don't recommend over stimuli, and also in our traumatic brain injury patients, we definitely avoid overstimuli because they're still recovering from your brain injury. Even though it'll be long-term benefit of improving your dementia, we don't recommend too much stimuli in that early phase of recovery. So it really depends, and it just requires that careful diagnosis. I think we'll leave the questions. I'm happy to answer questions after, but just to conclude the proceedings, thank you so much for your attention. I hope and pray that it was useful for you guys. Without further ado, let's bow our heads in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, great God of the universe, we are so grateful, Lord, that you've created a masterful organism. And Father, you've given us all the things that we need in nature and in foods and in plants, Lord, to help revitalize our system, Lord, almost as if it was just purpose-built. Father, Lord, we are so grateful, Lord, for that, for your creation. Father, help us, Lord, to look after it. Help us, Lord, to care for it, because it is your temple. We ask this in the name of your Son, Christ Jesus. Amen. Amen. Now, just one more thing, just one announcement, just for tomorrow night, it's a special evening. We're actually going to have, just in keeping with the last point on fasting, just because the local church, Aikaba Church, is doing a period of fasting for specifically people who are dealing with health challenges. So in keeping with that, you guys are more than happy to come and participate with us for that during the day, but also we're going to have this session a bit earlier. So instead of 6:30 as advertised on the flyer, we're going to have it at 6, okay? So at 6 p.m. instead of 6:30. So come a bit early, okay? Because we're going to do not just a health lecture, but also we'll do a bit of a prayer session as well, because we realize the importance of prayer in dealing with these health challenges, all right? So just to encourage you, just to give a foretaste, you don't want to miss that, because it's going to be very, very powerful, okay? Yes, DNA. So DNA is the fundamental building block that leads to life. So it's right in the cell. We'll go literally looking under the microscope. What is the makeup of each cell that leads to how we are today? What makes us who we are? No, it's not. It is. Yes, we will talk about what is the difference between the gene and the results of that gene, but we're not going to talk about specifically to do with that. But it's just more just appreciating because everything we've learned during the week has been based on a molecular understanding of the body. You know, a lot of these things interact with the DNA, so we're going to go into deep dive into it, and also the spiritual aspect. So yeah. All right, thanks, guys. Thank you.